The Omega Seamaster Diver is, in my view, one of the original designs from the 1990s. True to its own design language, this line of Omega watches has changed very little. However, the Seamaster collection has been adjusted to the current habit of sizing watches. Most of the current watches are 41mm or more. For everyone with a smaller wrist, Omega made a Seamaster of 36 in the 90s. But is that watch still worth buying today? Let's check out the Omega Seamaster Diver 300M in 36mm. This 300M was made in 1999, and obviously it's 36mm in diameter. The lug-to-lug is 42mm, which has to do with the relatively short lugs. The height is 11.5mm, which I think is impressive for multiple reasons. First, the watch appears slimmer than that. It seems more to be like 9 or 10mm, which gives the watch a very good proportion overall. This has a lot to do with the movement, which is only 4mm high, but also with the design of the case. There are many levels and steps in the case, and also many curves that make the design smooth and flowing. This helps to hide height and make for an elegant watch. The bracelet width of this watch is 18mm, but it does not taper at all, and this makes the watch head therefore look a little too small on the wrist, just because the proportions seem a little off now. The bracelet links are solid material, and all the elements including the clasp are held together with solid pins. You heard right, there are no spring bars in this clasp, but more about that in a second. The clasp is very solid. Obviously milled from a block of steel, it is also equipped with a diving extension that probably no one will ever use. The bracelet in general appears very solid and made very well, considering it's from the 1990s. At that time, I think the Rolex Submariner still had a stamped sheet metal clasp, so yeah, but still, I think the bracelet is the worst part when looking at the whole watch. Simply because the bracelet offers very little opportunity for adjustment. There is no traditional fine adjustment with the spring bar within the clasp. The only way to size the bracelet is by removing entire links from the bracelet, and speaking of removable links, there are not that many of them. The main reason I think for this is the diving extension that takes up a lot of real estate within the clasp. That is a little disappointing, to be honest, because, well, most of us would like to have more adjustability, and pretty much no one is ever using the diving extension. But you still have to remember, this is a watch from the 1990s, and obviously in the 30 years since, Omega clasps have obviously evolved. By the way, if you want to size up the watch a little bit, my trick is to put a very flat strap or bracelet on the watch. That makes the watch appear a little bigger itself. Also, losing the OEM bracelet for something from a third party that tapers helps to take the focus away from the wide bracelet that otherwise appears a little too wide for the watch. Obviously, the original bracelet is what it is. If you want to keep it, you have to live with it. The lume on this watch is a form of tritium lume, so it is very lightly radioactive, and the benefit of that lume was when it was new, it was always glowing. It did not need to have to be charged by light or excited by light. The problem today is that that type of tritium lume has a half-life of about 12 years, so there's not much glowing anymore. To get the lume shots here, I had to excite the lume with a lot of bright light and then use a long exposure setting on my camera. And on video, I would have no chance of you showing how this watch looked under lume originally. So this watch today has no useful illumination at all. It is essentially a watch without lume. The watch itself, I have hardly anything negative to say about. Others have criticized the bezel for being hard to grip, and I can see where this is a problem when the watch has been worn for a long time and the bezel gets jammed by grime and dirt. But with a fresh and clean bezel like here, the action is crisp and just a little harder to use than, let's say, my Baltic Aquascuff. The positive side is that the bezel doesn't get caught on stuff. The overall important point here to say if the watch is for you is the size. Here's the watch on my wrist. And here's the watch next to my 34mm Rolex and my 38mm Baltic Aquascuff. So I guess if you never would wear a 42mm watch, and wearing a 40mm watch is sort of kind of a gamble for you in terms of size, this watch might be for you. For bigger wrists, you can obviously also just buy the regular sized version, which was also available at the time, and that watch came at 41mm. In general, the Seamaster wears very well proportioned and flat. It slips under the cuff thanks to its low height and the design of the case. I must say, putting on a sports watch in 36mm after being accustomed to 38 to 42mm watches for such a long time is a little unfamiliar in the beginning. I do have the urge to think that the watch should be too small, but it really isn't. And a big part in that plays the bracelet. The bracelet just makes the watch appear a little smaller than it actually is. Because the relationship between the watch and the strap is unusual for how my eye is trained to look at watches right now. But the clasp is so solid, I guess they just could not make that one smaller. And again, this watch is 30 years old. We just have to run with it. Due to the production date of this watch should have an Omega caliber 1120. There's also a later version of the 36mm Seamaster with a coaxial movement, but for the regular version, it's the 1120. And that movement is basically an ETA 2892A2. And it comes with all the general benefits of that caliber. It is also the same caliber used in the normal sized 41mm Seamaster. Omega upgraded a couple of things to have the movements COSC certified, and for example, the 1120 has 23 joules instead of 21. The watch has 44 hours of power reserve, which is not terribly much, but it's sort of still okay by today's standards, considering this watch is 30 years old. The movement features a date indication, a hacking second, and obviously automatic winding. Being basically an ETA 2829, many independent watchmakers will be familiar with this movement, so a service outside from an Omega retailer is possible. The downside is that depending on what's wrong with the movement, replacement parts can basically only be provided by Omega, since a couple of things in the movement are different. And they don't do that anymore for independent watchmakers, as far as I know. So serviceability is a little bit better, but it could become a problem in certain circumstances. Yet I also would say the situation for servicing this watch is much easier than, let's say, more specific watch movements from other brands. Let's talk about the helium or gas escape valve. It's one of the very distinct features of this Omega. Hardly no one of us will ever use it, but it does not bother me, and at this point it's just a design feature of the Seamaster for me. The question is it a potential failure point? Will it flood the watch if unscrewed and submerged in water? According to Omega's website right now, even with the helium valve or gas valve unscrewed, the watch is 5 bar or 50 meters water resistant. But well, that's not a lot. And taking a dried up and flattened gasket into account, I guess this can become a failure point when going for a proper swim or dive. If any one of you have experience with such a failure, please let us all know in the comments down below, because I just don't know more about this topic and I really would like to know more about it. So far, I can only suggest that this might be a problem. The prices for this watch have become more expensive, just like all the watch prices, but they can still be had for around $2,000 depending on where you buy and where you live. I have to say I think that's kind of fair for what you get. It might even be a little underpriced. I don't know what else to say more about the price. Let's talk a little bit more about the size. 40 to 42mm has become the norm for most watch brands today, and I don't think that's about to change, because it just fits most people. I must admit, wearing this being a sports watch in 36mm, I had my insecurities for a couple of moments. If you deal with watches a lot and constantly see pictures of watches being worn, as weird as it sounds, you sort of have to take a moment to adjust yourself back to the fact that there is no size right or wrong. For me, this was a moment where I realized how much fashion and trends there is in watches and how that can lead to insecurities. I think that this watch is a perfect item to bridge a gap and connect people. However weird that statement seems, it's a cool thing to share a watch between spouses or to teach kids about watches. A family-friendly watch, so to speak. And given the fact that there's also still a 41mm version of this watch, there is basically a watch for everybody. In my opinion, the 36mm Omega Seamaster is still a very good watch for today. It speaks the undiluted design language of the Omega Seamaster, and the proportions are fantastic in my book. I personally like, but that's in the nature of the Seamaster design, that it has its own independent design language in the first place. It's a perfect shrunken version of the main 41mm watch. And you can tell effort went into making this watch equally as good. Love it or hate it, it is a pure Seamaster with no fuss. Oh yeah, and you could lose the helium escape valve if you ask me. Nobody uses it anyway, but well, after 30 years we're now way past the point of changing anything about that. To me this watch seems to still have a great future ahead of itself. Being a 30-year-old design, there are a couple of things to be aware of. In my opinion, the bracelet is the biggest drawback. The bracelet makes it very 1990s, which on one hand is cool from a style perspective, but the bracelet has not a lot of adjustability and it does not taper, throwing off the proportions of the watch a little bit. The obvious use case for this watch is a practical one. A modest mid-size watch with a lot of features for daily wear and a more than decent water resistance. But there's also an emotional use case here. I think this watch is very undiscriminating and versatile. This watch is unisex, and not just by its size. It is not distinctly masculine or feminine in its design, and therefore a great watch to share with others. For whom it fits, this watch would be great to share with a wife or girlfriend, or as a watch for women in the first place. Even better, given the fact that the watch is also available in a 42mm version, you can buy and wear them as a matching set with your spouse. And lastly, think about this watch as a kid's watch. Sure, it's an expensive kid's watch, but how cool would it be to share a watch with your kid, or have the same watch as your kid and teach them about time? Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on new videos in the future. And you can also follow me on Instagram for more content. You find the link for Instagram in the video description. If you have any watchmaking related questions, or if you have any ideas for future videos, feel free to comment them in the comment section down below. Thank you, and I hope to see you in the next video again.